Hope, Cordelia had learned, was not a sunrise feeling. It was a knife-edge discipline, a decision remade in every humiliating hour when survival looked like obedience, and obedience looked like surrender. People spoke of destiny as though it arrived with trumpets and holy light. In her life, destiny smelled of damp wool, old iron, and another person's signature pressed onto papers she had never been allowed to read. It wore someone else's crest at her throat. It smiled with her uncle's mouth while he called betrayal peace. By the time the moon climbed over the basalt ridgeline, Cordelia understood that love and law could both be forged, and only one of them would keep her alive. The cart stopped at the outer ring of the Windrider's stone circle with a violent jolt that slammed her shoulder into the slatted wall. Her wrists were raw where transport chains had rubbed skin open during the mountain climb, and cold had settled so deep into her bones that every breath felt borrowed. Winter wind threaded through the ceremonial banners and found every bruise beneath her borrowed bridal layers: white linen, silver stitching, a dead noble girl's sigil sewn over her heart. Alistair Stormborn stepped into view as if he were arriving for a feast. His cloak was sable at the collar, his gloves immaculate, his smile rehearsed. He did not offer a hand when the guards hauled her down. He adjusted the pendant at his throat and looked her over with the detached satisfaction of a merchant checking cargo. "Stand straight," he said quietly. "If you shake, they will think you are lying before you open your mouth." Her knees threatened to fold anyway. The silver collar at her neck caught moonlight and gleamed like frost. Not ornament, not mercy. The inner band carried hair-fine runes keyed to Stormborn blood, and she had felt their bite 3 nights ago when she refused to practice the line he demanded. "I am Calanthe Valaborn, daughter of the Eastern March. I come by free will to seal peace." She had said she was not Calanthe, and pain had knifed from throat to spine until she dropped to the floorboards of the wagon and tasted copper. Now Alistair touched 2 fingers to the small black sigil stamped at his wrist, and the collar tightened a fraction, a warning so intimate it felt like a hand closing around her windpipe. Her breath hitched. He leaned close enough that she could smell clove oil on his skin. "You are alive because I am patient," he murmured. "Do not test how expensive patience becomes." A scribe from his retinue approached with a scroll tube and lowered his voice. "Not enough." "Lord Stormborn, the lineage seals were accepted at the lower gate, but if the Windrider archivists request bone record confirmation tonight—" "They will not," Alistair said. "The oath is at Moon Peak. Once witnesses hear her vow, dispute becomes insult. If they challenge after, we grieve and demand recompense." His mouth curved. "Either way, we gain command leverage." The scribe swallowed. "And the decoy?" Alistair did not look at her when he answered. "If rejected, she dies as fraud. If accepted, she disappears as liability. Do not force me to repeat simple strategy." The world narrowed to the space between one heartbeat and the next. Cordelia heard torches crackle, wolves pacing beyond the stone ring, distant drums signaling the start of oath procession. But the words decoy and dies lodged under her ribs like broken glass. All this time she had known she was being traded. She had not known she was designed to fail. She lifted her chin because if she did not, she would collapse. And collapse in front of him had always invited a lesson. "You promised sanctuary for the Duskwalker laborers at Grey Fen," she said, voice rough. "You swore no one would be turned out." Alistair gave her a look of almost bored surprise. "And you believed me. That is still your most dangerous flaw." He turned away before she could answer, leaving her with guards who never met her eyes and a line of Windrider soldiers waiting at the inner stones, armored in dark leather and wolf fur. Their standard, a silver hawk over crescent claw, snapped in the wind. No one welcomed her. No one asked whether she consented. She was marched between standing stones older than any pack memory, each slab carved with oath runes that glowed faintly under moonlight. At the center waited the moonstone altar and the binding chalice. The High Elder began formal words in a voice like dry bark, reciting blood debt, border raids, dead names. Cordelia was positioned opposite an empty place where the Windrider representative should stand, her hands clasped so tightly numbness spread through her fingers. If the chosen groom refused to appear, she would still be offered, then judged. Do not cry. Do not plead. Stay upright long enough to find one opening. Then the western gate horn sounded 3 sharp notes, and movement rippled through every rank in the circle. He came down the basalt steps without heraldry, as though titles meant less than weather. Tall, broad-shouldered, scar carved from temple to jaw, another crossing the hollow above his collarbone where old violence had healed, pale and hard. Darius Windrider, the war alpha who had sent regents to council for 5 years and not once attended a treaty rite in person. The one people said had refused kingship because prophecy turned crowns into graves. The elder faltered mid-phrase. Alistair went still beside the witness stones, calculation flashing behind his composed face. Darius took 1 step into the ring and stopped. The bond struck like a drawn bowstring released inside her chest. Heat pulsed beneath her skin, then climbed, a molten thread snapping tight from sternum to throat until her pulse thundered in her ears. Rain and cedar smoke and clean iron flooded her senses, not from the torches, not from the crowd, but from him, as if her body had remembered that scent long before she met its source. Her knees weakened for a different reason now, fear braided to stunned recognition. Across the circle, Darius's gaze locked on her. Amber bled into his irises, brightening to molten fire while ancient gold runes flared along the edges of his scars, lighting the hard lines of his face. The predator rose behind his eyes, not mindless, not cruel, simply undeniable. His breath roughened once. No one spoke. Alistair recovered first. Alpha Windrider, he said, too smooth. We are honored by your personal acceptance of silence. Darius's voice was low, carrying anyway. He did not look at Alistair. Who collared her? The question cut through the ring like steel. Murmurs ignited in the outer ranks. The elder glanced between them, suddenly uncertain of ritual order. Alistair spread his hands in offended diplomacy. A ceremonial restraint only, transit protocol for an unstable tribute. Surely your people do not object to prudent handling. Prudent handling. Her throat burned where silver kissed skin. Darius moved then, crossing the ring with controlled force that made armed captains step back on instinct. He stopped at arm's length from Cordelia and looked at her collar, then at the bruises above her cuffs, then at her face. His jaw flexed. When he spoke, the words were for her alone. Can you breathe? She nodded once because speech felt risky with everyone watching. Do you want distance from him? He asked. Not. Do you belong to him? Not are these lawful chains? A smaller question? A human one. It almost broke her. Yes, she whispered. Darius turned, placing his body between her and Alistair in a single decisive shift that blocked every direct line of approach. His next command hit the circle like thunder. No one touches her. Any guard, any elder, any witness, you will stand down. Windrider soldiers dropped to one knee by reflex. Even the nearest Stormborn men hesitated, reading the runes blazing across Darius's collarbone and forearms now, bright as smelted gold. Alistair's smile thinned. You would disrupt treaty law over a servant wearing borrowed panic? I would gut treaty law before I let coercion wear holy paint, Darius said, still without raising his voice. The collar fired. Agony tore through Cordelia's throat and down her spine so fast she bit back a cry. Alistair's fingers pressed his wrist sigil, hidden by his sleeve, and the silver band constricted hard enough to blur her vision. Instinct screamed one command through the pain. Run. She staggered sideways between standing stones as shouts erupted behind her. Boots struck gravel. Someone yelled to hold formation. Someone else called her by the dead girl's name. The moonlit ring broke into motion, cloak snapping, torchlight lurching across carved runes. Cordelia ran anyway, half blind, one hand at the collar, chains at her wrists clattering against stone, as she pushed into the narrow passage behind the altar, where old drainage cuts dropped toward the lower terraces. Cold air sliced her lungs. Pine resin and wet rock filled her nose. She vaulted a fallen lintel, slipped, caught herself on bleeding palms, kept moving. The collar pulsed again, less violent, more directional now, trying to drag her toward the keyed command like a hook in flesh. She slammed her shoulder into a stone pillar and used the impact to twist out of its pull. Pain burst white behind her eyes. I am not Calanthe. I am not tribute. I am not your proof. Behind her came the pound of pursuit, 2 sets, then 3. Storm-born cadence, she thought wildly, because she had learned the rhythm of her uncle's guards the way prey learned weather. A shout rose from above in Darius's voice, furious and sharp, ordering lanes sealed. Another command answered in Windrider tones. Metal rang. Cordelia reached the lower terrace where the circle's runoff met a frozen stream, moonlight silvering black ice and dead reeds. There was no clean path forward, only a deer track along the ravine wall, and 20 feet to the next outcrop. She lunged for the track, boots sliding, fingers clawing frozen dirt. The collar seized with a brutal jerk, snapping her backward. She hit the ground hard, breath punched out, stars exploding across her vision. A shadow loomed at the ridge edge above her. Alistair's voice dropped through the dark, calm as ever. Enough theater, he called. Come back now and I will say you panicked from travel fever. Keep running and I activate full restraint. They will watch you choke in a ring of sacred stone, and I will weep while they believe me. She rolled to her knees, shaking. The ravine wind cut through soaked linen. Her fingers found a loose rock, useless against armored men. Still something. Footsteps approached from 2 sides, closing. Then another scent crashed through the cold, rain and cedar and iron, and a larger shape dropped from the terrace wall to land between her and the nearest guard with predatory grace. Darius half-shifted as he rose, claws extending from one hand, gold runes burning hot across scarred skin. "Touch her," he said to the men advancing, "and lose the arm." No one moved. Cordelia stayed on her knees in the frozen reeds, chest heaving, collar biting at every swallow, while the balance of the night tilted towards something none of them had planned. The silence broke first in the men, not in the wind. Steel whispered from sheaths, then halted when Darius lifted one clawed hand without turning his head. His voice stayed level, which made it more frightening than a shout. "Windrider line, close the ravine mouth. Stormborn guards, drop weapons and step back from the stones. Lord Alistair remains where he stands until I decide whether treaty witness still applies after unlawful restraint." Alistair laughed once, brittle around the edges. "You are posturing over a frightened girl in borrowed silk." Darius did not grant him a glance. "She asked for distance. You heard her." Cordelia tried to rise and nearly fell again. Her legs shook so hard the ground seemed to move beneath her, the frozen reeds brushing her palms with a dry hiss. The collar pulsed another warning, less agony now than threat, as if it was listening for Alistair's next command. Darius noticed. He crouched to her level and spoke in a voice meant only for her, the harsh consonants softened by control. "I need to move you. May I touch your arm?" No one had asked her permission in years. The question landed harder than the chase. She nodded because her throat still burned too fiercely for words. His grip was careful, warm despite the snowmelt cold, and the contact sent a bright current along the bond line already taut inside her chest. He drew her behind him and rose in one smooth motion, setting his body between her and every blade in sight. Two Windrider sentries reached them, broad men in fur-backed armor with the crescent claw emblem stitched at the shoulder. Both stared at the collar, then at Alistair, and their faces went hard. "Lower gate," Darius said. "Infirmary corridor sealed. No council access, no witness interviews, no one from Stormborn beyond the second wall." Alistair spread his hands again, performing reason for the crowd gathering above. "This is an insult to my house. She is sworn treaty tribute, not your personal—" "Finish that sentence," Darius said quietly, "and you will spend the night in an iron cell learning what insult feels like." A ripple moved through the men on the ridge. Cordelia had grown up among predators disguised as statesmen. She knew when fear took root in a room. It had taken root now, not because Darius was loud, but because everyone could see he meant every word. They began the climb out of the ravine in a tight wedge, Darius at her side, 2 sentries ahead clearing slick stone, 2 behind watching Stormborn movement. Cordelia kept stumbling on the narrow path where ice glazed the basalt, and each misstep jarred the bruises at her wrists. The mountain fortress emerged by degrees as they gained elevation. First the outer watchfires along the ridge, then the black silhouette of staggered walls built into the cliff itself. Then high bridges of timber and chain, linking towers carved straight from rock. It did not look like a palace. It looked like a place made by people who expected siege and winter and betrayal, and had chosen to survive all 3. They passed under a gate arch scored with old claw marks and moon runes hammered in silver nails. Wolves watched from the parapet, some in fur, some in skin, all silent. Cordelia felt their attention move over her like weather. Stranger, tribute, threat, mate. The last word was never spoken, yet it threaded through the crowd in scent and posture and stillness. Heads bowed as Darius crossed the inner court. Not deep, not ceremonial. Reflexive deference to command. By the time they reached the infirmary passage, her hands had gone numb. Heat from braziers struck her face in waves, making the collar feel even tighter. The corridor smelled of pine resin, spirits, clean bandages, and the faint metallic tang of old blood scrubbed from stone. A healer stepped forward, gray-haired and spare, carrying a leather roll of tools. "She needs that removed now," Darius said. The healer's eyes flicked to the sigils. "Stormborn blood key. If I cut blind, I could trigger constriction to full lock." "Then do not cut blind," Darius replied. Alistair's voice floated from the threshold where guards held him at spear point. "You cannot open it without my mark. She will convulse if you sever the wrong rune. Return her, and I might choose mercy." Cordelia flinched despite herself. Darius saw it. The muscle in his jaw jumped once. He turned to the guard captain at the door. "Gag him if he speaks again." The captain hesitated only a heartbeat, then nodded. Alistair's next protest ended under cloth and fury. Tension snapped tighter in the room, but it clarified something for Cordelia. Windrider discipline was not gentleness. It was hierarchy accepted without debate when command turned absolute. She should have felt safer. Instead, fear kept scraping at her ribs, old and familiar. Rescue can become another cage, only lined with better blankets. Darius seemed to read the thought in her posture. He stepped back half a pace, opening space between them. "You are not confined here as property," he said. "Door remains guarded for your protection, not your silence. If you want a witness while we remove the collar, choose one." The healer lifted a brow, waiting. So did every guard. Cordelia looked at their faces, strangers all, and chose the only person in the room whose eyes held recognition instead of curiosity. "You," she whispered to Darius. He inclined his head once as if she had granted him something costly. The infirmary chamber was small, walled in dark cedar planks that held the night cold at bay. A single narrow bed sat beneath a slit window where moonlight crossed the floor in a pale bar. Darius unfastened his own cloak, heavy and fur-lined, and set it over her shoulders before she could refuse. The weight steadied her. The scent on it nearly undid her. Rain after heat. Cedar smoke. Iron and wild grass. Home, said a traitorous part of her that had never known a home at all. The healer unrolled tools and muttered under her breath as she studied the collar's inner runes. Primary lock at the nape, secondary choke glyph here, blood key thread braided through both. I need his pulse pattern to fool it. Darius held out his forearm. Gold runes glimmered beneath his skin like embers under ash. Use mine. This lock is keyed to Stormborn. Then I overwrite it. The healer stared. You would bind your alpha signature into a foreign control collar? For 3 breaths, if that is what it takes. Cordelia's pulse lurched. That was not a political calculation. That was risk, personal and immediate, offered without bargaining. The healer positioned a thin silver probe at the seam under Cordelia's ear. Darius moved in front of her and lowered to one knee so their eyes were level. Up close, his scars were maps rather than marks, old pain rendered into pale lines over bronze skin. One cut had dragged the corner of his mouth into a permanent edge that made his neutral expression look severe. His gaze was anything but severe now. I will touch your neck, he said. Tell me to stop at any point. She swallowed against the metal band. All right. His fingertips settled just below the collar, 2 points of controlled pressure over racing pulse. Heat surged through the bond like banked fire finding air, then sharpened into a pull so strong she had to brace a hand on his shoulder to stay upright. He drew a sudden breath, rough and unguarded, amber flooding his irises until almost no human brown remained. The room narrowed to that gaze, to the line between them drawn taut and bright. In her mind, panic and longing collided without mercy. This is madness. This is relief. I am still wearing a dead girl's crest. I am still one command away from pain. If I lean toward him, I betray every lesson that kept me alive. If I pull away, I tear something that already knows his name. I do not know what a mate is supposed to feel like, only what hunger and fear feel like, and this is neither. This is both. This is a door opening in a wall I thought was load-bearing. Keep breathing. Keep your hands where he can see them. Do not mistake protection for ownership. Do not mistake gentleness for safety too soon. Yet when he says, "Tell me to stop," my body answers by staying. My body, which has trusted no one. Cordelia, he said, barely above a whisper. Stay with me. The healer slid the probe. Runes sparked along the silver band in a ring of pale light. The collar seized once, then released a fraction. Darius's thumb shifted to the hinge at her nape. Again, he told the healer. Now. The locking pin snapped. Metal parted. Cordelia gasped as the band came free, pain draining out of her neck in a dizzy rush that left her trembling. The healer caught the collar in a cloth before it hit the floor. Every etched glyph along the inside had gone dull, as if a light had been blown out. Darius did not touch her again immediately. He set the dead collar on the table himself, then stepped back and waited for her to decide distance. She pulled the cloak tighter and met his eyes. The bond hummed, no longer a strangling wire, more like a deep cord held beneath both their breaths. From somewhere in the upper fortress, a bronze bell rang 3 times, followed by the longer call of a council horn. The healer exhaled. They are convening tonight. Darius's expression turned flint hard, but he kept his attention on Cordelia. They will demand testimony, lineage proof, and custody arguments by moonset. Fear returned, cold and practical. If they rule treaty fraud, they can cage me. They can try. A shadow crossed the doorway as the guard captain returned, helmet tucked under one arm. Alpha. Hall is filling. Elders are already asking whether the storm-born witness accuses the girl of attempted flight from lawful oath. Darius rose to his full height, predator and sovereign in the same breath. Then, they will hear me first. He looked down at Cordelia, waiting again. Always waiting. Even now. Do you want to come to the hall or remain here under my guard while I challenge custody? The question should have been simple. It felt like standing at the edge of a blade. Take me, she said. If they decide my fate, they do it with me in the room. For the first time since the stone circle, something like grim approval touched his face. Then stay beside me and do not kneel to anyone unless you choose it. He offered his arm, not a grip, a choice. She took it, and when they stepped into the corridor together, every wolf they passed moved out of their path as if moonlight itself had made way. The corridor bent toward the council tier in a descending arc of black stone and torchlight, and Cordelia learned the cadence of Windrider obedience in real time. Every guard they passed touched fist to chest and stepped aside. No one addressed her directly, but no one reached for her either. The absence of hands felt as startling as mercy. At the final turn, a pair of bronze doors stood open to a narrow antechamber lined with old war maps burned into cedar panels. Voices rolled from beyond, a layered growl of elders, captains, and witnesses assembling under ritual law. Darius stopped before the threshold and motioned the guard captain closer. No one enters this room unless I call, he said. Not elder rank, not storm-born witness. If the council objects, they object to me in public. The captain bowed and withdrew, posting 2 wolves outside. The doors remained open a handspan, enough for air, not enough for intrusion. Cordelia stayed wrapped in his cloak, breath shallow from the nearness of too many decisions. Her wrists throbbed where chains had scored skin. Beneath the ache, the bond thrummed low and steady, no longer a weapon, not yet comfort. Darius turned toward her and, for the first time since the ravine, let silence sit between them without command attached. His gaze dropped to the sigil stitched over her heart, the crest of the dead girl she had been forced to impersonate. That mark will be used against you if you stand before them wearing it, he said. I can remove it now. She tightened her grip on the cloak. Cutting it off in there will look like tampering. I said now. He drew a narrow blade from his belt and held it out, hilt first, an absurd gesture that still made sense in context. Choice. Again. If you prefer to do it yourself, I will turn away, he said. If you want my hand, I will keep steel from your skin. Confusion struck harder than fear for a heartbeat. Predators in her life had never offered options unless each one led to the same trap. She took one breath, then another. Your hand, she said, voice rough. Steady hand, please. He nodded once and stepped in. Lift the cloak edge. She did. The blade tip slid beneath silver thread and parted the dead crest in clean, precise strokes. His knuckles brushed linen but never touched her skin. When he finished, he set the cut emblem on the map table as if it were contaminated evidence. Cordelia stared at it. All that humiliation, all that borrowed identity, reduced to a scrap of cloth. Darius sheathed the knife. They will try to force speed, he said. Quick rulings are easier to manipulate. If they push you to answer as Calanthe, say your name once and stop speaking until I challenge procedure. You trust they will honor your challenge? I trust they fear the consequences if they do not. He moved to the water basin in the corner, poured from a copper jug, and set a cup within her reach. No pressure, no command. Drink. She obeyed, then almost laughed at herself for obeying so quickly. The sound came out brittle. You give orders like weather. His mouth shifted at one corner, not quite a smile. I am working on it. The tension broke for a breath. Then the noise from the hall swelled, a chant of legal phrases she had grown up hearing weaponized. Bloodline, witness, asset, fraud. Darius braced one hand on the table, shoulders squaring as if he had stepped back into armor. "There is one more thing you need before we walk in," he said. "Under sovereign law, I can place you under my personal claim and remove you from council custody pending inquiry. No cage, no separate holding, no contact from Stormborn." Her pulse stuttered. "By claiming me as mate." "Yes." The words settled between them, heavy and bright. He continued before she could answer. "If I did it now, they could argue consent was compromised by bond shock, collar trauma, and political duress. Any enemy with half a legal brain would challenge it within a day. You would be protected tonight and stripped tomorrow. Worse, they would say I used rank to take what had not been freely given." He lifted his head fully, meeting her eyes without flinching. "I will not do that to you. Not even to win." Cordelia had spent years bracing for the hidden cost behind every kindness. She waited for one now. It did not come. "Why?" she asked, almost angry with the question. "Would you give up the easiest path?" "Because easy paths built this room," he said quietly. "Because a man who mistakes power for permission becomes the same species of monster as the one who collared you. Because if you ever choose me, I want no echo of coercion in that choice." The bond answered with a deep pull that made her chest ache. In her mind, everything sharpened and blurred at once. "I am standing in a locked antechamber with the strongest wolf on this mountain, and he is telling me what he could take, then refusing to take it. I do not know where to put that." Fear has always been useful because it is simple. Fear says duck your head, say yes, survive the hour. This is harder. This asks me to imagine a future tense where my consent matters as law, not decoration. My body keeps waiting for the snap of pain, for the correction, for the moment his patience runs out. It does not. He waits. He keeps waiting. What do I do with a man who can break doors and chooses to hold them open instead? She set the empty cup down carefully, aware her hands were no longer shaking as hard. "Then we do it your way," she said. "Name, truth, procedure. No claim under duress." A sound came from the hall, sharper now, an elder's voice demanding immediate presentation of the tribute female. Darius straightened and offered his arm once more. "Stay at my left side," he said. "If anyone addresses you as property, look at me, not at them." Cordelia laid her fingers on his forearm. Muscle and old scars shifted under her touch, controlled force leashed by intention. "I keep expecting this to be a performance." "It is," he said, opening the door wider. "Just not the kind you were sold." By the time they crossed the threshold into the council hall, the fourth night bell had rung over the fortress, and the moon sat high enough to paint every carved beam in pale silver. The chamber was vast, hewn straight into the mountain's heart, with stepped tiers circling a central speaking floor of polished basalt. Torches burned in iron braziers. Pack banners hung overhead like dark wings. At the far end stood the witness rail where Alastair, ungagged and immaculate again, watched with injured dignity sharpened into calculation. The murmur in the hall turned when Cordelia entered wrapped in the Alpha's cloak. Elder Maris, white-braided and hawk-nosed, struck the floor with a carved staff. "Proceeding opens under moon authority. The female known as Calanthe Velaborn, submitted in treaty tribute, is retained as disputed property until lineage." "Cordelia Duskwalker," she said, clear enough to cut him off. "My name is Cordelia Duskwalker." A rustle raced through the tiers. Maris's mouth thinned. "Names are verified by archives, not self-declaration." Darius guided Cordelia to stand one pace behind his left shoulder, then strode to the center dais. "Then verify what you like," he said. "But hear this first. She stands under my immediate protection. Any attempt to confine, chain, isolate, or transfer her without sovereign review is challengeable under Old Claw Article 9. Another elder leaned forward, rings glinting on clawed fingers. Article 9 applies to blood heirs and sworn kin, not tribute stock dragged from a cart. The word stock hit Cordelia like a slap she had spent her life expecting. Darius's head turned slowly toward the elder. The hall cooled by degrees. "Say that again," he said. The elder held his ground, perhaps believing rank could shield contempt. "She arrived as barter. Until proven otherwise, she is an object of dispute between houses." From the witness rail, Alistair lowered his eyes as if pained by the exchange, then spoke in honeyed sorrow. "My niece has always been volatile. We feared this confusion. I beg the council for lenience while grief and exhaustion distort her recollection." Cordelia stepped forward. "He forged my papers. He keyed a control collar to his wrist and triggered it tonight in front of your stones." Alistair spread his hands. "A transport restraint only, used to prevent self-harm during panic." Maris banged the staff again. "Enough. Pending records. The female will be moved to secure holding below East." A captain from the second tier dropped to the floor before the sentence ended, hand outstretched toward Cordelia's arm. "I will escort the asset," he said. Darius moved faster than sight, interposing his body in one violent, precise step. Bone shifted under skin as he half-shifted, forearms furred and clawed, runes igniting along scar tissue in bands of molten light. A raw, predatory resonance rolled through the chamber and struck every wolf instinctively below the rational mind. The captain froze inches from Cordelia. "No," Darius said. It was one syllable, but it held the weight of law and threat, and something older than both. He planted his feet in front of Cordelia, broad back shielding her from the entire tiered hall. "You were ordered not to touch her." "Alpha," Maris snapped, "stand down from display. This is a council, not a battlefield." Darius did not look away from the captain. "Then govern like one. I gave a lawful warning in the ravine, at the gate, and in this chamber. You ignored all three." He finally turned, gaze sweeping the tears. Amber had overtaken his irises completely now, predator intelligence glaring through human form. "Hear sovereign challenge. I invoke blood right command over this proceeding. Any hand raised against Cordelia Duskwalker is a hand raised against me. Kneel and acknowledge, or rise and contest by claw." The hall went still enough to hear torch resin pop. For one taut second, Cordelia thought they might choose contest, might plunge the room into chaos Alistair could spin into proof of barbaric instability. Then the first knees hit stone. The guard line nearest the dais, then two captains, then a wave through the lower tiers as rank calculated survival and obeyed. Even Elder Maris bowed his head, knuckles white on the staff. Only Alistair remained standing at the witness rail, jaw rigid. "You would break treaty custom for a liar," he said. Darius's voice dropped, dangerously calm. "I would break custom to prevent legal theater from becoming sanctioned abuse." He reached back without looking. His hand found Cordelia's, closed once, firm and warm, then released before it became possession. The gesture was brief, almost private, yet she felt it all the way to the base of her throat. Maris spoke through clenched teeth. "Sovereign challenge is recognized. Custodial transfer denied pending review. The claimant, Cordelia Duskwalker, will remain under alpha protection in open quarters, monitored by council-appointed witnesses." "Agreed," Darius said. "Witnesses from Windrider and Neutral Ridge packs only. No Stormborn proximity without my consent and hers." The elder hesitated, then nodded, trapped by his own law. Cordelia looked over the bowed heads and found Alistair watching her with pure hatred now, his polished grief mask cracked. He touched his wrist where the collar sigil had been keyed and smiled without warmth, as though promising this was only the first move. Fear rose, but it did not swallow her whole this time. She stood straighter beneath the weight of Darius's cloak and heard her own voice when she spoke next. "I request formal charges be recorded tonight," she said. "Forgery of bloodline documents, coercive restraint, false witness under moon oath." The hall stirred again, surprised by her directness. Maris grimaced, requested, and entered. Darius turned his head just enough that she could see his profile, the severe lines softened by something like respect. "Well spoken," he said under the noise, "for her alone." It should have felt small in a hall built for power struggles. Instead, it landed as a steadying hand against old vertigo. She was still in danger. Alistair was still breathing. Nothing had been resolved. Yet as the council scribes bent to their tablets and the captains remained kneeling in reluctant obedience, Cordelia felt the first fragile shift in a lifelong equation. Protection, in this place, did not demand she disappear to earn it. The last murmur had barely settled when Alistair lifted his bound witness token and bowed with exquisite control, as if the hatred in his eyes had never shone at all. "Then let law be complete," he said, voice carrying to the upper tiers. "I invoke grief witness petition under Eclipse Clause. If a declared blood relative contests identity and presents ancestral record, council must hear it before moonset." Elder Maris looked tired already, but he nodded. "Petition recognized. Present record." A council archive clerk stepped forward with a cedar case wrapped in oilskin and iron thread, bearing materials submitted by Alistair. He opened it slowly, theatrically, and withdrew two slate-gray tablets no larger than a handspan, both carved with spiraled runes that shimmered when they caught torchlight. The hall leaned toward them as one body. Cordelia felt Darius go still beside her in the subtle, predatory way of a wolf hearing a trap spring in leaves. "Recovered from Stormborn Vault Crypt 3 nights past," Alistair said, "predating current border accords by 6 generations. The text concerns dormant throne magic and a bloodline trigger carried through the maternal branch of Duskwalker kin." His gaze found Cordelia with soft sorrow sharpened to a blade. "It states that if such blood stands beside a war-crowned alpha during Eclipse Oath, one life must be offered or both packs fall to famine and fracture." The words landed with a physical force. Not because they were credible, Cordelia thought wildly, but because they sounded old, and old things frightened councils that had outlived too many winters. Several captains exchanged looks. A junior elder muttered a prayer to the Moon Mother under his breath. Darius stepped off the dais and took the tablets without asking permission. Gold traced the scars at his knuckles as his runes answered the carved lines. For a brief second the hall brightened with reflected light, and Cordelia saw confusion crease his brow. "Age stain is wrong," he said. "Tool cuts are recent at the edge." Alistair spread his hands. "Stormborn preservation wax can blur age patterns. If you distrust my archive methods, appoint a neutral runesmith." Maris was already signaling to a scribe. "Done. Tablets impounded for immediate reading." Alistair dipped his head, gracious as a host. "And because I seek peace, not vengeance, I offer a second petition. Pending inquiry, let there be a temporary binding cup between houses at Eclipse Rise, a shared draft before witnesses to prevent retaliatory bloodshed while this female's claims are weighed." Cordelia heard what he had not said. A cup from his hand. A ritual with no room for refusal. A performance that could be staged in front of both packs and retold as truth by dawn. She turned toward Darius and found him watching Alistair with open contempt now. "You poison language first," he said, "then call yourself healer." Alistair's expression did not flicker. "I bury sons, Alpha. You bury soldiers. We both know what unchecked rage costs." The resulting tension ran through the hall like wire pulled tight. Maris struck his staff once more. Petitions entered. Eclipse right proceeds in limited form under council control. Until then, claimant remains under sovereign protection. Lord Alistair remains under escorted witness status and surrenders all personal blades, vials, and rune keys for search. There it was, Cordelia thought, the first crack in Alistair's plan, and still he smiled, because he did not need every door open. He needed one. Darius handed the tablets to the neutral scribe personally. Chain of custody, he said. My rune mark. Your rune mark. Elder mark. If wax breaks, hearing ends, and I call challenge. The scribe swallowed and pressed his thumb to the clay seal. Recorded. As guards repositioned and elders rose for procedural recess, Darius guided Cordelia toward the side passage leading to open quarters assigned under watch. Alistair's voice followed them, gentle enough to pass for concern. You have always been good at dramatic timing, little niece. Do not worry. If your memory fails, I can still coach you through a confession. Cordelia did not look back. She felt the old reflex anyway, shoulders tightening for pain that did not come. By the time the fifth bell trembled through the fortress stones, snow had begun in thin dry sheets beyond the arrow slits, and the holding quarters smelled of cedar smoke, clean linen, and the iron tang of warded locks that were meant to keep danger out rather than trap her in. Two neutral Ridgepack witnesses sat outside the door with writing boards on their knees. Inside, Darius paced once, twice, then stopped as if forcing himself into stillness for her sake. The collar, he said. I sent it to Master Ilian in the Forge archive. He can trace blood key architecture and timestamp activation surges. If Alistair triggered it in the ravine, we will have proof in metal. And the tablets? Runesmith reading in progress. I posted my own guard at the archive stairs. Cordelia nodded, then realized she was gripping the edge of the table so hard her fingers hurt. She released it and flexed her hands. Darius noticed the motion and crouched beside the bench where she sat. Your wrists are reopening, he said quietly. May I clean them? She answered yes before fear could draft an argument. He brought warm water and antiseptic resin, moved with deliberate care, and paused each time she tensed. The room seemed too small for the intensity of not touching and touching, for the way his breath changed when her pulse jumped, for the way the bond deepened into something that felt less like impact and more like alignment. Not easy, not simple. True in a way she had no framework for. In her mind, she was suddenly nowhere and everywhere at once, suspended between old survival math and a new equation she had not consented to solve, but could not deny. I am watching his hands. I am counting each second they stay gentle. I am waiting for debt to appear because debt always appears. Yet the ledger stays blank, and that terrifies me more than cruelty ever did. Cruelty is predictable. Kindness with no hook is not. I want to lean forward until my forehead touches his chest, and I hate that I want that. Because wanting has always been the first vulnerability predators smell. But he keeps asking, keeps naming choice like it is a law older than pack law. If I believe him and I am wrong, I lose everything. If I do not believe him and I am wrong, I lose this. I do not know which risk is greater. I only know I am so tired of being managed that honesty feels like stepping into winter water and praying I remember how to swim. He tied off the final bandage and sat back on his heels. There is more you should know, he said. The prophecy I walked away from did not name your house, but it named an eclipse bride, forged vows, and a king brought down by his own claim. Elders have used that language to pressure me toward ceremonial distance for years. Cordelia met his gaze. So Alistair found the story and built his plan around it. Yes. Darius's mouth hardened. He does not need to kill me in open combat. He needs 3 minutes of witnessed narrative. Poison me during a binding cup. Blame you. Cite forged prophecy. Seize emergency border command while both packs panic. The underlying logic clicked into place with chilling precision. And if I deny it, I sound like a liar defending herself. And if I defend you, they call me mate-mad and unfit. A knock sounded at the door. One witness stepped in with a sealed strip of clay and bowed. Archive report, first pass. Darius broke the seal and scanned the narrow tablet, then handed it to Cordelia so she could read. Collar keying confirmed Stormborn bloodline. Activation spikes at Procession, Ravine, and Council Hall. 3 unlawful coercion events time-stamped by Moon Index. Her knees weakened with relief so sudden it hurt. Evidence. Real hard evidence that did not depend on anyone believing her tears. A second line sat below in hurried script. Prophecy tablets pending. Surface age inconsistent. Core stone old. Carvings recent. Darius exhaled once through his nose. Grim satisfaction edged with worry. Enough to challenge authenticity. Not enough to stop tonight's rite. Maris will claim caution and proceed. As if summoned by the prediction, Maris himself appeared moments later under guard escort, staff tucked beneath one arm, formal frustration radiating off him in waves. Eclipse rises in less than an hour, he said. Council upholds temporary binding cup under restricted protocol. 3 officiants only. No private handling of vessels. Lord Alistair insists this gesture is necessary to prevent Stormborn withdrawal and immediate border mobilization. Withdrawal is his threat, Darius said. Do not call it necessity. Maris held his stare. Call it what you like. If Stormborn riders descend while our command is divided by challenge law, villages on both sides burn first. His eyes shifted to Cordelia, not unkindly, but not safe either. Girl, if you have further accusations, bring them in the right chamber with witnesses present. You wanted to be in the room. This is the room. After he left, silence settled heavily. Cordelia stood and crossed to the slit window. Snow turned the courtyard lanterns into blurred moons. Somewhere below, wolves called the changing watch. She pressed her palm to the cold stone and tried to slow her breathing. Say we refuse, she said. Darius came to stand beside her, close enough that warmth met cold without touching. Then Alistair announces to every ear that we feared sacred arbitration. He rides before dawn with half the neutral packs convinced we hid guilt. So we go. We go prepared. He glanced at the bandage at her wrist, then back to her face. If anything feels wrong, you step behind me and speak my name once. Loudly. A thin, unwilling smile tugged at her mouth. That is your strategy? It has worked so far? The smile vanished as quickly as it came. He called me little niece in the hall like this was family business. Her voice roughened. He taught me how to read weather fronts when I was 8. He held my hand through my first shift fever. He signed the order that sold me. Darius's expression did not soften into pity, and she was grateful. Betrayal from strangers cuts flesh. Betrayal from kin cuts architecture. She turned toward him fully. You speak from experience. His pause answered before his words did. My last regent poisoned my brother and called it mercy to avoid succession war. He looked away toward the snow-blurred yard. I learned that love and treason can share a face. The bond tightened, not in panic this time, but in recognition of matched wounds shaped differently. She reached out, then stopped midway. May I? He nodded. She laid her hand over his, once, brief and deliberate. His fingers closed around hers with reverent restraint, then released. 3/4 of an hour later, they walked into the eclipse chamber beneath the oldest tower, where the roof opened to the night through a circular stone throat, and moonlight fell in a pale ring across the floor. Maris stood at one point of the triangle, a neutral officiant at another, and Alistair at the third, with sorrow carved into every line of his posture. On a black altar between them sat the moonstone chalice and 2 smaller binding cups of hammered silver. Protocol, Maris recited. Witnesses observe, officiants inspect vessels, House representative pours, sovereign and claimant drink to provisional peace. Cordelia watched every hand. The officiant inspected the cups and found nothing. Alistair poured from a sealed flagon of dark red ceremonial wine, the scent rich with winter berries and spice. Then, as Maris turned to verify the oath text, Alistair's thumb pressed briefly to the underside of one cup in a motion so small it could have been steadying the metal. Cordelia saw the glint, a bead no larger than a tear, clear against silver, then gone. Her pulse detonated. Stop. No one moved quickly enough. Ritual momentum carried forward like a downhill cart. Maris gestured. Claimant presents cup. The officiant, following script, placed the cup into Cordelia's hands. A bitter green scent rose beneath the spiced wine, sharp and wrong, a memory from herb sheds where wolfsbane had been locked behind iron mesh and handled with gloves. She lifted her head and met Alistair's eyes. He gave her a look of almost tender encouragement. Drink, it said, or refuse, and look guilty. Darius extended his hand for the cup, gaze fixed on her face. Cordelia. She could have thrown it, could have shouted poison and started a brawl Alistair would call hysteria. Could have hesitated long enough for the hall to decide she was staging fear again. Instead, she did the only thing that preserved one narrow path to proof. She handed him the cup and said clearly, for every witness, "Smell before you swallow." Alistair laughed softly. Paranoia is not evidence. Darius raised the cup. His nostrils flared once. For a heartbeat, Cordelia thought he would set it down and call challenge. Then Maris, anxious and rigid under ceremonial pressure, snapped, "Drink or declare refusal. This right cannot be suspended by implication." Darius's jaw clenched. He took a measured swallow, barely more than a mouthful, and lowered the cup. The change was immediate and horrifyingly controlled. Gold runes along his throat flared too bright, then fractured into jagged lines as if something acidic moved beneath his skin. His fingers spasmed. The cup hit stone and rolled, red wine streaking the moonlit ring. He swayed once. Alistair pointed at Cordelia with perfect timing and shouted, voice breaking into righteous outrage. She warned him to create alibi. She poisoned the cup and staged suspicion. Seize her now before she flees. Guards surged at the chamber edge. Darius dropped to one knee, one hand braced against the floor, breath sawing rough as if each inhale had turned to knives. He looked up through pain and roared one command that shook dust from the ancient ceiling. "No one touches her." His voice cracked on the last word. The eclipse shadow slid across the moon aperture, and the chamber plunged toward darkness as the first guard stepped over the ring. The first guard hit the moonlit ring at a run, spear lowered toward Cordelia's ribs, and the chamber fractured into factions in a single breath. Two Windrider sentries grabbed for him and missed when he twisted through. Maris shouted for order. The neutral officiant shouted for distance, and Alistair cut across all of it with the force of a practiced crisis. "She confederated with him," he cried, pointing at Cordelia while Darius fought for air on one knee. "You all heard her direct the cup. Seize the poisoner and bind her mouth." Cordelia backed one step, then another, the black altar cold against her hip. Darius's runes flickered like damaged lanterns over his throat and arms. He tried to rise, failed, and drove his fist into stone to keep himself upright. Every instinct in her screamed to reach him, to throw herself between his body and the oncoming guard line, but Alistair was counting on that impulse. He needed panic. He needed spectacle. He needed 3 minutes of belief. A second guard lunged. Darius's voice ripped through the chamber again, rougher now, threaded with venom and command. "Stand down." Half the wolves froze on reflex, half did not. Alistair moved during that hesitation, coat flaring as he vaulted the edge of the ritual arc with impossible speed for a man who styled himself merely political. A silver control chain snapped from his sleeve, each link etched in miniature blood runes. It whipped across the space between them and caught Cordelia at the shoulder curve where the old collar bruise had barely begun to fade. Pain flared bright and immediate. He yanked, dragging her off balance toward him. "Do not fight me," he said through clenched teeth, close enough for only her to hear. "You will confess, you will weep, and I might still choose a quiet cell instead of a public stake." She twisted against the pull, boots skidding in spilled wine. "You had me collared like an animal. I had you managed like a liability." Around them, chaos thickened. The neutral witnesses at the chamber wall were shouting chain of custody violations. Maris was arguing procedure no one could enforce anymore. One stormborn escort drew steel. A windrider captain answered with claws half-surfaced. The eclipse shadow deepened through the open roof, turning torchlight thin and bruised. By the time the moon was half-veiled, Cordelia understood the crux with perfect brutal clarity. Darius could still kill for her, but if he killed now while poisoned, Alistair's story would harden into law before dawn. The only path left was the one Alistair had never imagined she would take. Not escape. Exposure. He jerked the chain again. Her knees hit stone. The impact rang through her wrists and rattled the chamber in her vision. She tasted copper where she bit her tongue. Darius surged to his feet at last, swaying hard, and two elders shouted that he was unfit to command. Alistair smiled at that, triumphant and grieving at once. "Witness his collapse," he called to the room. "Prophecy warned us. The false bride poisons the war alpha and now clings to him as mate to shield herself from judgment. Secure her." Cordelia stopped resisting the chain. Alistair registered the stillness and leaned in, certain he had broken her. Instead, she looked past him to the side table where the archive scribe had placed the impounded prophecy tablets for post-rite review, both still sealed with clay marks from Darius, the scribe, and Maris. She followed the line of spilled wine to a shattered silver cup at her knees. A jagged edge gleamed like a small moon. In her mind, thought narrowed to a single hard thread. "I am done being interpreted by men who call themselves necessary. I am done waiting for rescue that arrives chained to another negotiation. I know what he needs. He needs me silent long enough to speak for me. He needs me contained long enough for the room to agree I am containable. If I run, I am guilt. If I kneel, I am property. If I speak without proof, I am hysteria with a pulse. So I will give them proof they cannot reframe. I will cut this lie open in front of everyone and let the room watch it bleed ash. I am afraid. I am still afraid. But fear is no longer the only thing in me. There is a line through my chest that ties me to a man who asked, every time. And in that asking, he handed me back my own name. I choose what happens next." She grabbed the broken cup edge with her free hand and sliced her palm. Blood welled fast, hot against cold air. Alistair cursed and snapped the chain to drag her back, but she used the pull to drive forward instead, rising with a violence that surprised him and slamming her shoulder into his sternum. He staggered. The chain slackened one fraction. It was enough. Cordelia lunged for the side table, seized the sealed tablets, and smashed them down onto the moonstone altar. Clay seals cracked. Gasps broke around the ring. "Old law witness," she shouted, blood running over carved stone. "Kin betrayer evidence petition under eclipse oath. Let Truthfire answer forged rune from living blood." Maris barked, "You have no efficient standing." "I have blood standing," she fired back. She pressed her bleeding palm flat across the first tablet and let crimson flood the carved spirals. Nothing happened for one heartbeat, then two. Alistair laughed, sharp with relief. Then the runes ignited. Not gold, white. A clean, scorching flame raced along each line of script. then split from genuine ancestral grooves into jagged branches wherever newer cuts had been forced into the old stone. Those branches burned black and lifted as smoke, revealing bright, raw tool marks beneath. The chamber filled with the smell of hot slate and resin. On the second tablet, entire sentences curled away like dead bark. Underneath remained only fragments: famine, king, fear, and a different final clause in intact ancient hand: no sacrifice demanded, rule by terror ends. The words blazed across the altar, visible to every witness. Alistair's expression collapsed from sorrowing elder to naked rage. "Trickster blood," he snarled. "She tainted the record." Darius took one step forward, unsteady but immense, and planted himself between the guards and the altar. "No one interferes," he said, each word ground through pain. "Trial is active." Cordelia turned to face the chamber, blood still dripping from her hand onto Moonstone. "My name is Cordelia Duskwalker. I was sold under forged lineage." He keyed coercive silver to his own wrist. "He poisoned your sovereign under sacred protocol and called it peace. I invoke kin betrayer trial by voice and claw. I name Alistair Stormborn as oath false, blood false, and murderer by design." Maris stared at the burning tablets, then at Alistair, then at the gathered captains who had all seen the forged lines blacken in real time. The old elder's voice came out hoarse. "Invocation is recognized." Alistair did not wait for formal sequence. He struck first. The silver chain lashed toward Cordelia's throat with a hiss, driven by full command force now that pretense had failed. He shouted as he attacked, voice cracking with contempt and panic. "You were bought to be spent, girl, not crowned." Cordelia caught the chain in both hands. The links bit into her cut palm and tore fresh pain through her fingers, but she held. Heat roared up the bond, not wild, not borrowed. Something hers answering something his. White light coursed from her skin into the chain, racing link to link like stormfire down a wire. Alistair screamed and tried to release it too late. On his wrist, the blood key sigil branded into his flesh flared, then burned out in a burst of gray sparks. The command mark vanished, leaving only scorched skin and shock. He stared at his bare wrist as if language had abandoned him. Across the ring, Darius bared his claws and roared to the chamber. "No aid, no interference, her verdict." No one moved. Alistair recovered with the speed of a cornered predator. He ripped a ritual dagger from inside his sleeve, blade narrow and darkly stained, and drove at Cordelia's center line. She pivoted inside the strike the way he had taught her years ago with wooden practice knives in the Stormborn yard. Step, angle, break wrist. Memory turned against its maker. Her forearm slammed his grip broke, and the dagger clattered across the stone into spilled wine. He swung with his other hand. She ducked, caught his coat collar and elbow, and used his momentum to slam him back against the standing stone at the edge of the moonring. The impact knocked air from him. He clawed for purchase, snarling. "You ungrateful little—" "You taught me leverage," she said, breath shaking but voice clear. "You just never thought I would use it on you." At her feet lay the ceremonial moonstone blade used for oath cuts, dislodged when the altar had been struck. She picked it up and pinned Alistair harder with her forearm across his chest. From inside his coat, one of the forged sigil tablets he had kept as insurance slid half free, wedged over his heart like a shield of lies. His eyes found hers, suddenly pleading. "Cordelia, listen to me. You do this, and you have no blood left. No house. No name but the one they give you." The old wound split open at the sound of her name in his mouth. Then she felt Darius at her back. Not touching, not taking over. Simply there. She felt the chamber holding its breath. She felt her own pulse steady. "You sold your blood for power," she said, each word deliberate enough to ring off stone. "And power has no daughter now." She drove the moonstone blade through the forged tablet at his chest. The tablet shattered with a crack like ice breaking on a river. A violent pulse of backfired rune light burst outward, throwing sparks and ash. The heart rune Alistair had hidden beneath his shirt flared once in jagged red, then split and went dark. His body jerked, then sagged against the stone, eyes wide with disbelief more than pain. The chain fell from his hand and lay inert across the ring. For a long beat, no one in the chamber moved. Then Maris lowered himself to one knee. One by one, captains and elders followed, not to Alistair, not to Darius, but to the claimant who stood bloodied and upright at the center of the ruined rite with truth fire still burning over her palm. Darius stepped to her side at last, breathing hard, poison sweat at his temples, and looked down at Alistair's body, then up at the watching Pax. "Record judgment," he said. "Kin betrayer trial concluded under eclipse witness, forgeries destroyed, poison attack witnessed, claimant exonerated." The neutral officiant, hands shaking, bent over his board and wrote. Cordelia let the moonstone blade lower to her side. Her hand would ache for weeks. Her shoulder burned where the chain had struck. Her uncle lay dead at her feet, and grief moved through her in a complicated, necessary wave that did not dilute relief. She met the eyes of the room and did not look away. No one called her tribute now. Darius swayed beside her, and the poisoned scent turned sharper as his runes flickered unevenly across his throat. Cordelia dropped the blade, caught his forearm, and shouted for the healer before pride or protocol could interfere. Windrider guards finally moved, not toward her, but toward the evidence. The shattered cup was wrapped in clean cloth. The black flagon was sealed with 3 wax marks. Alistair's ritual dagger was lifted with tongs and placed in an iron casket. The silver control chain was coiled and tagged beside the dead collar Master Ilian had already traced. Nothing vanished into private hands. Nothing was misplaced. Elder Maris rose from his knee and spoke with a scraped, humbled voice. "Record all items under dual-pack custody: collar, chain, cup, flagon, dagger, forged tablets, ash residue. Master Ilian and neutral runesmith panel will issue full analysis before dawn bell." He looked at Cordelia then, and the old defensiveness had burned out of him. "You asked to be in the room. You were right to insist." The neutral officiant, still shaking, read from his board to the chamber and to the witnesses at the door. Poison attack observed, claimant exonerated, kin betrayer judgment complete, forged prophecy disproven by truth fire. The loaded glances from captains who had doubted her turned into lowered heads and tight-jawed shame. One of the men who had reached for her in the council hall stepped forward, knelt, and placed his spear on the ground. "I called you an asset," he said. "I was wrong." Cordelia did not offer absolution she did not yet feel. Then do better when the next woman says no. By the time they cleansed the ritual ring with salt water and moonherb smoke, the eclipse had passed and the moon burned clean again through the tower opening. Darius had taken antidote bark and bitterroot under healer supervision. Color returned to his face slowly, as if each breath had to be negotiated back from the edge. He refused the litter they offered. He walked to the center of the circle under his own strength, then turned to Cordelia in full view of both packs. No one spoke. He removed the black leather guard from his throat, exposing old scars and new bite-vulnerable skin, and lowered himself to one knee on the cold stone. The sight struck the chamber harder than any roar had, an alpha kneeling first, not compelled, choosing. His voice was rough from poison and command, but steady. "Cordelia Duskwalker, fear is no longer binding this choice. Law is no longer binding it. Debt is no longer binding it." His gaze held hers, open and unflinching. "Do you still choose me as mate?" The bond drew tight under her ribs, not as panic now, but as a clear, resonant line. She stepped into the moonlight ring until she stood directly before him. "Yes," she said, and then stronger, so every witness heard. I choose you in truth. He rose only when she touched his hand. May I mark you? He asked, every word deliberate. Yes. Tell me to stop, and I stop. I know. He moved behind her slowly, giving her room to turn away if she wanted. She tilted her head, baring the junction of neck and shoulder where Alistair's chain had struck. Darius's palm settled at her waist, anchor steady. His breath warmed her skin first. Then his teeth pressed in, controlled and precise. Not a tear, but a claiming cut that sent a sharp line of pain through her shoulder and straight into the bond. The pain lasted one heartbeat. Heat rushed in behind it, deep and flooding, spreading from the mark through her chest and down her arms until her fingers shook. Gold light chased white along the old bruises at her throat, unwinding tension she had carried so long it had become posture. The chamber dissolved at the edges. She felt his pulse as if it were inside her own body, felt the fierce restraint he lived inside every day, felt grief for his brother, rage he had buried to keep his people alive, tenderness he had offered her without demand. None of it drowned her. It met her, made room for her. A low sound escaped her, half sob, half astonished laugh. Darius released the bite at once and pressed his forehead to her temple, breathing hard. Cordelia. She turned in his arms, cupped his jaw, and tasted iron and cedar and winter air between them. Your turn, she whispered. His pupils widened, predator and man aligned in one stunned expression. You do not owe me return. I am not paying debt. She laid her hand over his pulse at the neck. I am choosing. He bared his throat fully. Cordelia rose onto her toes and bit over the beat beneath his skin. Not wild, not hesitant, enough to mark and seal. He went rigid, then shuddered once as the bond completed in both directions. Light flared from his runes, then leapt to hers, threads crossing and weaving until the separate patterns along his scars and her new mark resolved into one continuous sigil, bright as molten metal and clean as dawn water. A profound stillness dropped through her mind, the first true silence she had known in years. No command hooks, no false names, no anticipation of pain. Just him and her, and a shared interior space that felt like a door barred against the world in the best possible way. His hands framed her face with reverence. Mine, he whispered, not as ownership, as vow. She answered against his mouth, tears cooling on her cheeks. Yours. Together, forehead to forehead, they said the final word at the same time. Mate. The chamber exhaled as one body. Maris knelt again, then the captains, then the witnesses from both packs. Not in fear this time, but in formal recognition. Darius wrapped her in his arms and held her without urgency, without performance, as if the entire fortress could wait while they learned this new, settled rhythm. Cordelia listened to his heartbeat and felt it echo inside the bond, steady and sure. At dawn, in the high hall above the eastern gate, snowlight poured across the treaty table. The physical evidence lay in ordered sequence before the scribes. Dead collar, burned-out chain, poisoned cup residue report, sealed flagon analysis, dagger toxin match, tablet fragments, and truth fire ash. Master Ilian read his findings aloud with forge worker bluntness. Collar keyed to Stormborn Blood Command. 3 coercive activations confirmed by rune heat pattern. Chain etched for remote constriction. Cup and dagger both carried wolfsbane distillate from the same batch. Tablets recut within 7 days on ancient stone substrate. He set down the final slate. Fraud engineered, not disputed. No one disputed it. Maris signed first as elder witness, then surrendered unilateral custody authority under the new charter he had argued against the night before. I mistook tradition for justice, he said, voice low. That failure ends here. Darius signed as Alpha King at last, accepting the mantle he had refused for years. Cordelia signed beside him as High Luna and treaty co-sovereign, her hand steady over the name no one could strip from her now. The new accord outlawed tribute marriages across both borders, criminalized coercive collars under war law, and bound Border Command to a joint council with rotating neutral oversight. In the outer courtyard, they brought every confiscated control collar from Windrider and Stormborn stores, plus the chain mechanisms seized from private cells. Under witness count, Master Ilian fed them into a white-hot smelter until silver ran bright and harmless into casting molds for gate bells. By second bell, Cordelia stood in the valley annex that had once housed unwanted trainees and announced its new charter as Sanctuary House. Ridgepack witnesses recorded each clause. Rejected wolves granted shelter without bloodline fee. Abandoned children protected under pack law. No claimant turned away for failed shift status or disputed parentage. The first arrivals came before she finished speaking. Two silent sisters from a border farm and a gray-eyed boy clutching a torn blanket. Cordelia knelt to their height and held the door open herself. That evening, as sunset burned copper along the basalt ridge, both packs gathered in the main court. Alistair Stormborn's body had been claimed by his remaining kin under guarded terms, his estates broken and redistributed to families he had dispossessed. The captain who had once called her stock now served on sanctuary watch by her appointment, earning trust through work rather than apology. Darius came to stand at her right, no throne between them, only shared ground. When the herald named them, the court bowed in a single wave, wolves and people together, banners lifting in the wind. Cordelia felt the mark at her shoulder warm, felt his answering mark pulse beneath her hand, and looked out over the bowed packs with a calm she had never imagined possible. Chosen openly, chosen forever.